Okay, good morning. Welcome to Southend. I'm Joe Hill. I'm the director of Focal Point Gallery. I'm just going to do a few little housekeeping things first, health and safety and all that. So there isn't a fire alarm test today, so if you do hear the alarm, please make your way to the exits at the back or at the bottom here. Can I also ask you to turn all of your mobile phones to silent, please, just to make sure there aren't any interruptions, especially as we've got quite a lot of technology here. We'll be showing some films as well, and the phones can sometimes get in the way of some of the broadcast. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about Southend and the connection to Holland, because over the last couple of years, the gallery and the council here have actually made some strong connections with Holland. We've got 3 flight routes that run now from Southend Airport over to Holland. And also, I'm told that the end of Southend Pier, which is 1.3 miles long, is the closest point to the mainland Europe in the region. So we were delighted when our colleagues at ECVAN Network chose to host a symposium with us, partly because it gives everyone a chance to see the great exhibition we've got on in the gallery as well. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I'm sure Chelsea's going to thank lots of people when she comes up in a moment, but I just wanted to personally thank Donna, Chelsea and the team at Wysing for organising such a wonderful programme and putting so much energy and thought into this. So thank you very much. And finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the show in the gallery. So the exhibition's called Dirt, Art and Stupidity, and it's curated by Paul Clinton and Anna Gritz. I'm not going to say too much about it because Paul's actually offered to do an introduction for everybody about 1 o'clock. So if you grab some lunch after the morning sessions, head down to the gallery space at the bottom. Paul's going to give you a short 10-15 minute introduction to the show, and then there'll be a chance to have a look around it as well. And also at the end of the day, at 6 o'clock, we're going to do a little drink session in the gallery as well, which will celebrate the end of the symposium, but also the end of the exhibition because it's the final day as well. So I'm going to hand over now to Chelsea Pettit from Wysing, who'll take you through the programme for the day. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. It's a really good turnout. Very exciting. Welcome to Working Together, the Impact of Artists on Institutions. My name is Chelsea Pettit. I am Head of Partnerships at Wysing Arts Centre, but also as part of my role, I'm the chair, not the chair, I am the coordinator of the East Contemporary Visual Arts Network. Before I kick off on what we are, I just want to say a big thank you to those who have funded us today. The Art Fund have put a lot of money into this and are really supporting us. Sarah Philp and Rachel Browning are here from the Art Fund, so thank you, the Art Fund. The Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the lovely Daphne, cultural attaché, is here as well, have also really supported all of our speakers coming over here today. The Contemporary Art Society, and of course Arts Council England, and Amy Botfield, I believe, is in the room today from Arts Council, so thank you for your support as well. So the East Contemporary Visual Arts Network is part of a wider network called the Contemporary Visual Arts Network. So we call them CVAN and ECVAN. I'll tell you a bit about East CVAN. We are made up of 18 visual arts organizations across the East region, and we deliver collaborative projects, we deliver exploratory and research projects such as this together, and we are basically trying to support artists and the arts sector and the arts infrastructure in the east part of England. A recent project we undertook, which you might have seen, was called Eastern Pavilions, and 12 organizations worked really closely with 12 artists who work closely with the organization, and we created a limited edition print portfolio with those artists. Some of them included Ryan Gander, Elizabeth Price, Andy Holden, Shrizavana Michelle, Gareth Bayliss, Coco Crampton, the list goes on, fantastic artists that we got to work with. As part of that project, we took part in art fairs, we showed the portfolio at lots of the partner organizations, and we also had a series of events and talks throughout that. But the project we're working on now brings us here today. And this came out of a 2014 trip in November where quite a few of our East CVAN members went to Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany. And really what we were trying to do was look to our close neighbor for innovative and inspiring ideas, new ways of working from an organization perspective, and also how they're getting artists to really change the nature of their programming. So we decided after that trip, we decided we really wanted to try and bring back some of these innovative ideas to share with the wider arts sector in England. And also we wanted to use the opportunity to create collaborative partnerships, perhaps for some long-term partnering opportunities for the East region and the Netherlands particularly, which is what we're focusing on today, obviously. But crucially, we really wanted to hear from the organizations and the artists who've made an impact on them. what is their story? What are the case studies? What have they done that has really changed the way they think about how they work from an organizational perspective? And so that's what has brought these fantastic speakers here today. And I just want to thank them for making the trip, for sending us all the presentations, for working so hard on what they're going to be talking to us about today. So thank you, guys. The aim today is to think about those words, working together, and what that means. We want to think about what artists are bringing to our institutions beyond just presenting work or having them in an exhibition, and how we might be able to make that more visible in what we do. So we want to really inspire each other with our case studies, and also share examples of good practice that we can share with colleagues across the sector. So if you look at the welcome pack, the handout for the day that you've got in front of you, you'll see a full list of delegates, and you'll see which breakout session you've signed up for. You'll also see the plan for the day. There's a few points where you can take part in questions and answer sessions. After the keynote speakers, after Beatrix and Ed speak, there'll be some time for that. Also over lunch, there's, as Joe said, lots of time to see the exhibition and talk to each other, have some lunch, and really just try and pinpoint some of those people you want to meet that are on that list. After that, we'll be coming back to hear from the Dutch organizations and the artists, their case studies, and we'll have some time for questions as well after that in the main auditorium. After a refreshment break, you'll see that you're going to the breakout sessions, and they're in various rooms. One is in here, working with collections, and there's a couple more outside, which will have signs. You have a little color-coded piece on your sticker, if it hasn't fallen off yet, that tells you which group you're going to be a part of. So hopefully that will be fine with you guys, and you'll go to the separate rooms, and we'll make sure there's people to tell you where to go. That's really where the crux of all of your good practice examples, all of your ideas and your experiences we want to hear from in those breakout sessions. And we'll be trying to compile all of that to bring back to a sort of summary of the day, and also a paper at the end of this, sometime in the next few weeks to go online for the whole national arts sector. But that leads me to the national arts sector in general. And now is the time to hand over to Donna Linus, who is the chair of the East Contemporary Visual Arts Network. Thanks.
Hi, so I just want to also add my thanks to everyone for being here today. It's really great to have you all here to discuss this topic. I just wanted to also give you a little bit of a snapshot outwards. I don't want to talk too much about the ECVAN as a network, but our network within the region is part of a much bigger national programme of 9 regional networks all working together within this national structure, ECVAN. And the outcomes and the discussions that we're having today will feed back to that national conversation, because the network as a whole has been working together since 2008. So quite a long time sort of thinking about what we can achieve as a network working across England. And in recent years, that's involved a lot of advocacy and lobbying to government and policymakers. So creating lots of documents that are going up and influencing the sector in which we all work. But in more recent year, over the past year, there's been a move within this wider network towards thinking about how we can better support artists as a dispersed network across England. So how can we help artists survive? How can we make it easier to make work? How can we make visible what they bring to our institutions, which is why we're here today. So there's been a number of these kinds of conversations happening all over the country. There was one just last month up in Leeds. So this is this is happening today, and it's obviously affecting our region, but it's also part of this much bigger conversation. So everything that we discussed today would be brought back to that network. And obviously, it's really exciting for us to be able to bring in our close neighbours from the Netherlands to play a part in this conversation. And, this thing about sort of making visible the intangible role that artists bring to our institutions is what today is centrally about. So, it's a great privilege to be able to invite such renowned speakers and artists to come to talk about this with us. So I'm really absolutely delighted that Beatrix Ruf, the director of the Stedelijk Museum, and Ed Atkins will launch the day off with a keynote, a provocation, or whatever it might be, around the subject. I'm sure all of you know that Beatrix is well renowned for the close relationship that she builds with artists, the artists that she works with over long periods of time. And you can see artists reappearing with her in multiple ways over the years. She's been director of the Stedelijk Museum since 2012, and before that spent 11 years shaping the Kunsthalle in Zurich. And before that, a really formative period at the Kunsthaus Galeries, where she worked for 5 years. And what's interesting about her, she has all these other roles, and told me not to read out the end. The biography is amazing in terms of the reach and influence of her ideas. Right through from sitting on advisory programs for the Samdani Foundation in Bangladesh and the Bundeskunsthalle in Bonn, and sitting on lots of award juries, but also interestingly working outside the institutional structures. Well, within another kind of institutional structure, as curator at the Tate Triennial, for example, in 2006, and in 2008 as the co-curator of the Yokohama Triennial. But, significantly, Beatrix has worked with Ed Atkins before, both at Kunsthalle Zurich and at the Stedelijk Museum, where his solo exhibition, Recent Ouija, in 2005, was his first solo exhibition in the Netherlands. So for me, it was very interesting. Did you know that? You look surprised.
2015.
Sorry, is that not what I said? Sorry. All right, 2015. So it's very interesting to me that what would be interesting to hear about that decision as what to bring Ed from Zurich, working in Zurich, into this new role at the Stedelijk Museum. So Ed, of course, is a British artist whose most recent solo exhibitions in the UK were at Chisenhale Gallery in 2012 and the Serpentine Gallery in 2014. And since then, he's had this meteoric, hugely successful international career with solo exhibitions. One just opened at the National Gallery of Denmark in Copenhagen. He's shown at the Hammer Museum, Los Angeles, the New Museum, New York, MoMA PS1, and the Lyon and Venice Biennials in 2013, and has another busy year ahead with forthcoming exhibitions at the Kitchen and Gavin Brown Enterprises in New York and the Castello di Rivoli in Turin. So we can start the day with two more interesting and exciting speakers. So I'm going to hand the floor over to them. So they're going to be here having a discussion for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we'll come back and open the floor to you for questions. So I invite you up.
As is kind of obvious, we're not giving a standard keynote insofar as we're not delivering papers. We're not necessarily formally outlining the concerns of the day, the antagonisms, the discussions that will certainly emerge in the afternoon. But I think, for me at least, it was important that this was a conversation, that actually part of this, also this is just a rolling slideshow of things we've done together, I suppose, with maybe a bit of reference to it, but I think generally speaking, anecdote, a conversation about what I've found personally has been a kind of very useful dissolving of the appearance of certain institutional apparatus in a personal relationship and in an ongoing conversation, which I think is a very ideal situation for me, has been with Beatrix, just this thing over now the course of about 5 or 6 years of maintaining conversations, meeting up, doing projects together, but also massively extracurricularly. So it's nothing is kind of governed by these projects necessarily, but these are ways of interrupting our relationship and producing things. But we're essentially going to be talking about our experiences together. But also, I wanted to ask Beatrix a lot of things, because conspicuously her experience in this area of working together, working with artists as part of an institution and in other ways, is something that she's been doing for a lot longer than me. So there are lots of things that I want to know about, and I thought that potentially we could start by talking about certain kinds of historical precedents for artists within institutions and vice versa, and the kind of the dissolving of that in some way. That's my formal bit over. Sorry, yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to be here. We are waiting for the fish and chips already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think also it's a good start, because first things first. So if there would be no artist and no art, we would not be sitting here, I think, and we would not even not be close to asking any questions about how institutions should, are functioning. And we had a very long car trip and spoke a lot about very diverse things, from how this type of institutions started, how they developed, what the questions are now, and a few things came back, and I think we're going to touch on them during the talk. But from Kunsthaus Glarus to Stedelijk Museum, that's a very interesting range of institutions I was lucky to be involved in, and they also kind of represent a history of the institutions. So the Kunsthaus Glarus, for example, is one of the oldest foundations of Kunstverein in Switzerland, in the early mid 19th century. Kunsthalle Zurich is an outcome of the 80s, like, as I understand. I think it's the same age as the Focal Point galleries, like mid 80s, no? Early 80s? 90? Oh my God, I missed that. Time passed since I left Kunsthalle. And the Stedelijk Museum in the beginning also is a 19th century, but in comparison with the Kunsthaus Glarus, the Kunsthaus Glarus was one classic Kunstverein, Kunsthalle Foundation. Artists and civilians got together and said, there's no place for presenting and also selling. That's very interesting at that time. Contemporary art. And the Stedelijk Museum was, in the 19th century, foundation of private collectors with the same intention of showing contemporary art, but with a different kickoff, so to say, in the intention. And I do think it's very interesting to continuously remind oneself that the founding of institutions is always also like a signifier of what has been analyzed as being missing in a particular societal context at the time. So most of the Kunstvereins I know have been founded because there was no place to show art, contemporary art, because contemporary, like living artists, didn't have a place to show their art. There was no gallery system, and there was no place also to actually connect the art to a potential collecting audience.
Yes. Right.
And that was, and they all changed, as we all know, in this more than almost 200 years now. They went in all different directions, like starting collections, like the Kunsthaus Glarus also had a collection, or they intentionally kept collecting free, which is a very interesting aspect we should talk about as well. Or they mutated into like the city museum or the county museum, discussing that actually this element of activity is then missing in the city, like it happened in Zurich, and the Kunsthalle Zurich was founded in the mid-80s to kind of connect back to that. And so in a way, and for me, I actually only have been in the Stedelijk now for a bit more than 1 year, and I have to say I'm totally excited about the fact that all of that founding essence, in a way, is still in the bones of that institution. So even having, developed a collection which is like 90,000 works, the DNA of this institution is very much about looking at any given moment in the activity, how to basically empty out institutional fixations to allow artists to move it, and that is quite amazing. And I think that's one of the core things. If again there is no art, institutions have no reason to be there. And I think we all know that in the professionalization of all this type of institutions over the course of 200 years, of course, many things happened and many elements had been added, and I'm sure you know that, and Britain has the same, the United Kingdom has the same experience, that the public funding having been developed over 150 years and suddenly got cut in big portions. And this, let's say, the self-understanding of institutions to be not only representative of a public realm, but also to rely on that given a mission through the public is being highly irritated, and interestingly also you're challenged to rethink what is the missing links and what can be done, and what do we have to be, how do we place ourselves. And I do think there's a really healthy element in it, because I deeply believe in the public relevance of institutions as one of the organs of the citizen, like organs being funded for citizens to develop a voice in saying what place we want to live in. And in Switzerland, that was never a question. It was always rejected by the public hand to say, right, we are also securing the cultural sector. There was always a request to the civilians to say, if you want that culture, also you participate in it, also in terms of money.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that we had long discussions also about what is that place for the artist. And I do think that I'm very much interested in that continuous emptying of institutional, let's say, cliches also, that, or institutional structures that get, missing the English word,
they're presumed to be
or too stabilized.
Right, yeah.
And we all know that history of art developing institutional critique, beyond the post-institutional critique. But I actually do think that one of the key discussions curators and directors also should lead is to have institutional critique oneself. And in the time when I was at Kunsthalle, for example, we were challenged of either losing the place or buying the place, which was took almost 10 years actually to realize that project. And I had to argue a lot why this type of institution still is relevant. And I think actually it is something one should ask every day almost. Yeah. It's like, where does that relevance come from? Why do we insist on this relevance? And I had to, I often ask myself, really, do we still need this thing, like a Kunsthalle or a Kunstverein without a collection, where you have a totally different theme coming up with heritage and
sure.
and so and then museums taking on more contemporary programs, also having the so-called project space, and that is actually where the key is, or where the key was, like say 10 years ago, yeah. Is that the very particular type of working with artists in this type of institution is not the project space, but it is putting things central. Now, and I just had a little ping pong with Clary from Tate, and of course in the Stedelijk we have to ask ourselves the same questions, like how do you keep those spaces open in the face of more and more funding questions addressing the institution, and also the what we don't really look at ourselves, the commercialization of it. Like when you program with the little man in your ear saying, how much visitors can you generate with this show? Then you could also do something else. That is buying audience is a different task, I think, and it's also a different mission an institution has. And I think we have to look very, very closely and very critically to ourselves and say, but yes, we want as much audience as possible, but programming...
not at any cost, right?
Should, the programming first. then we could do other things, and we have to be inventive in reaching out in other ways. But it is a really big question institutions have to ask themselves.
I think this just going back to the kind of what seems to be at the root of this is like constantly rehearsing the problem, asking what is missing and what, you were saying earlier about the idea that actually institutions aren't necessarily indefinite. They don't necessarily carry on forever. That there is this, if they slip out of, these things have to change. But I also feel like, obviously, the conspicuous thing of this event today is the idea that maybe part of what is missing is the artist in the institution. And this idea that a lot of the institutional dreck that surrounds the running of a place, the horrors of all of that potentially the artist and the work itself is kind of lost. Insofar as you're talking about this little man in your ear saying, how do we get enough people through and how do we recoup this cost and all of this stuff? And I was wondering, one of the things that I've felt conspicuously in working with you and in a few other situations where what's amazing is part of your act, in a way, is to make disappear part of that kind of blockage for me. So how does an artist interact with an institution? Obviously, partially critically, but at the same time, there has to be a place where there can be some common ground found. That potentially we are after the same thing. Making work, supporting one another, supporting the discourse, all of this stuff. But in my experience with you, it's been a matter of that stuff is kept at bay. So if in the end, like my experience at the Stedelijk or the Kunsthalle Zurich is predominantly experience of talking with you and planning a show, and somehow that sleight of hand which makes disappear for the artist, at least partially. So my quandary in a way is like, how do you make the institution disappear at the same time as holding on to the importance of understanding what the institution is doing, in a way? And I feel like that's something that you've done. Maybe that's something it would be nice to hear about from the beginning, how relationships with artists and over time. Because I think one of the most conspicuous things that Donna mentioned was that you often work with an artist again and over years and see them again. That because in some institutional situations, you do the show, you fuck off, that's it. You never see these people again, and they're straight on to the next thing. There is this kind of constant roundabout of just process. So the idea of establishing ongoing conversations, ongoing dialogues, that seems absolutely fundamental to it.
Yeah. But one good thing is that if you change in the right moment, you can do progress.
Right, yeah.
No, but it is. I think that's also, in a way, and actually artists told me that.
Yeah.
That this is part of the professional duty also, that you have to think about your presence in institutions, and you have to enable progress for artists in that too.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important to think of. So, when you've done 10 years of Kunsthalle, and the question is not only for yourself as a professional, but also for the art and the artists you worked with. What is the development in a way? But and then, of course, a lot of luck is necessary to do that too. But I think one of the crucial things you just mentioned is we spoke about this, the disappearing of the invisibility or the emptying out of the institution. That's like improvisation. You only can improvise if you're really good at something.
Right.
And I think that is what professional context of an institution should enable.
Yeah.
It is an institution.
Well, then you empty it out
to
reconstruct it or something.
Yes, and you have to, when you make a decision, and we had long discussions about that, what does it mean in the Stedelijk Museum after having been closed so long and then moving back into the building to give the space, which is considered the big blockbuster space, to an artist of your generation. And it was received in an amazing way.
Yeah.
But you also have to prepare the whole surrounding of it. And I don't know if you aware of that, we've done a year of Tino Segal, like 1 year of emptying, so to say, the institution on many levels, because they're and not as a but really as a stress test also. So I think we forget that this institutional critique we have to perform ourselves all the time is about also a stress test towards the institution in a societal place. And I really do believe that there is so many reasons. There's I mean, I wasn't aware how many meetings there can be, or how many, how many organizational. I mean, I knew from Kunstler, because I had to finance 70% of the institutions. I was doing all the management department alone, so to say, but of course in a different scale. But I think every moment of that you have to ask why, and that is, it's sportive, but
I feel like the only way to constantly encounter that question, because obviously, I mean, I'm totally green to the running of an institution, and I appreciate from overhearing conversations and seeing the grey, ashen faces of people who have to deal with the bureaucracy and the horrors of this thing. But in a weird way, as an artist, there's a certain instituting of being an artist. But I was wondering, in this title of like the artist and the institution, conspicuously, you're not named in that couple. Because you're neither the institution nor the artist, right? So your position as this go-between, who can translate between the two things. But I was thinking, it's also this idea of emptying out, that potentially the institution that we're talking about, the arts institution, is obviously a way to model grander institutions and sort of microcosmically figure out and potentially develop discourses that actually are ways of modeling the insoluble, vast structures and institutions that we're all beholden to in more conspicuous ways. But I wondered how you feel as this kind of person that, that straddles the institution and the artist. Because for me, it's one of the things that we were talking about is that you have to spend time with artists. That sounds obvious, but I feel like it's conspicuous with you. I feel like that you're often, it's so obvious, but you're spending a lot of time talking to artists, not necessarily as an emissary of the institution, but constantly this thing is at your back, and you have to hold it off and maintain the discourse or something. I wonder if you could say a bit about like how you feel as this go-between, as not someone that is the institution and not someone that is the artist.
Of course, we are also the institution in the way that if there is no art, there is no art institution. But if there is no art institution, you can also not work on all of those things. That's an amazing possibility, and I do really deeply believe that it's an ethical duty also. If you say, but this is what I really want to, as Gilbert and Churchill say, all I want is to be with art. And if you have that why, then I think it's a really amazing thing to think about an institution in constant relationship to what happens in society, and I think we're not talking. I'm actually not saying that institutions have to fulfill political tasks in the official political functioning, but I think it is a political statement to, for example, also to keep that space free. And we just had to rewrite the Kunstplan, so the subsidy request, and we made a very clear statement that we also see a limit in visitors' numbers if there is the museum as a place also to really look into experiment and relationship with artists. Then there is a limit, because you cannot you can do every few years. And it's good that also you have to formulate the limitations.
Yeah.
But as a political act. And what you are talking about, that's the why question.
But it's fun, I mean, that's the front end for most artists, is obviously the considerations of the relevance of this institution and why it's there and all of this. And it's something that, as artists, we rehearse just as vigorously, which is that, why am I doing this? You know, like, what is this for? And trying to defend and I mean, this interesting kind of constant analogy of like holding things back, emptying things out, sort of making room, you know, because the world is inundated with data and information and things that kind of have to be correlated and you know, responded to. So somehow this kind of trick, and obviously, you know, my personal experience, I don't encounter that stuff. So when I, you know, like first meeting you, it was very conspicuous that you wanted to talk about the work, and that, you know, almost sort of clearing the deck of the kind of, all of the apparatus, not just the conspicuous public institution apparatus, but the art world dreck stuff, you know, clearing that in order to talk seriously about the work. I mean, I remember.
That's our job.
Yeah, I know, but it seldom happens. Is what I mean. Is that this is the trouble with this? Is it feels like you know, this ideal thing in a way obviates a certain kind of critical imperative, because actually, for me, there are lots of occasions of working with institutions that are conspicuously complicated, desperate, frightening kind of things, you know, where you're very, very privy of money, of constraint, of people not paying attention to you, you know, and what you might need, as in you might need to pay your rent, you know, you might need a fee. You know, all of this stuff that's like somehow last on the agenda. So I think that whatever this physical analogy of clearing things and making room, which for me begins with, you know, remodeling some of this stuff through the personal, you know, by you know, what happens when you do sort of, by sleight of hand, disappear some of the institutional thing. You're left with an actual relationship. And that relationship, to me, seems like the key to the blooming outwards of an institutional thing, that actually at its core is a conversation, a discourse, a relationship, you know. So I think that's something that conspicuously you've clearly done.
I think we spoke about that, is that it's actually totally selfish.
Yeah, right.
Totally selfish.
Yeah.
Like remember when I saw you work first, I thought, I have a real interest to first of all have more experience myself, but then also to enable experience of that, what I think is fantastically interesting.
Yeah.
And that's totally selfish.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic that we're enabled to do that, you know, to say, wow, look at that.
But that's a shared prerogative. That's what we, you know, and the selfishness of that, which is obviously, eventually, hopefully, very productive on a much broader scale of sharing something. I mean, it strikes me that potentially the role of the director of the institution, you know, or curating things and selecting and conversing and stuff, it's very similar in some ways to the role of an artist, you know, or not the role of an artist, but the job, what actually it entails of kind of staking out discursive ground, making room for this stuff, trying very hard to get people to see and think about these things, you know, which I think is the productive confusion that's possible, you know. And I don't, you know, it seldom happens, I suppose, in a way, at that point where there's a kind of collusion between the institution and the artist, both of which categorical kind of horrors are gone, to the point where at least for a while you can entertain the idea that you're just people talking. And then, you know, everything the machinery starts to move again. But I wonder why this, I mean, and I'm sure there'll be loads of stuff later today by people who actually know, but the speculation of like, why the artist is missing from a lot of institutional process. Not the process itself, but the getting them in. I mean, it's very hard to not think of this in kind of very physical analogies all the time. Like, get them in. Hospitality, you know, somehow. What's on offer? What are you allowed to do? And I do think it's potentially, you know, this idea of getting rid of the institution by appearance is potentially tricky, you know, because actually part of the job is a critical relationship. But in the end, it can't be this kind of simple antagonism. Seems to be the least productive, finally, way of finding common ground, finding an area that we would share.
Well, I think one crucial, I actually, I'm really, really against any confusion between the artist and the curator or the director.
Yeah, okay.
I really do think that it's precisely a different thing to do.
Yeah.
Because producing images, and you spoke about the intangible, it's a highly professionalized ability too. And but I do think that our professionalism as curators or directors of institution has to be how to translate, and translate really touches on every aspect of the institution.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to translate to an audience to experience things without being, again, not only the artists and the artworks being inhibited by things, but also the audience not being inhibited by experiencing those things.
But also that you are the primary, the first audience.
Yes, exactly.
So that thing of, a meeting point, I feel like it's often, maybe again that's a kind of something that will be spoken of later, but that people working within institutions are also the audience. They're also people with opinions, and they are part of that.
Yeah.
That actually being snagged in the rigmarole of running an institution, that actually that it serves to separate, which again is I'm sure a very hard thing to retrieve, to remember that you are this person who is looking at art and talking to artists and enabling things, but as a member of the public as well, So, but again, I'm sort of fascinated by whatever this common ground is, where potential kind of categorical things and roles and job titles and acronyms can be sort of more or less dissolved, at least temporarily, in order to then remodel, refix, and then open it to its full sort of, this is good. Sorry, I was just noticing. Yeah, sponsorship.
Was a few bottles of beer, because
exactly.
Ed needed beer to do a symposium.
Yeah. Just to speak a little bit, maybe it's worth talking. I'm conspicuously aware of not knowing what people want to hear of, I suppose. But to speak anecdotally about our experience or my experience of working with you on things, and how things come back around, and how important a kind of development is. Because I think, and I know I touched on it, but this thing of, I wondered whether you could talk a bit about some other of the artists that you work with over the years, and also that are friends of yours. There's a fear, I think, about, and a cynicism around relationships between people, professional art institution people, and artists, And there's an idea that, for good reason, around kind of favoritism or certain things, but there has to be a kind of heart somewhere of a relationship that actually is a relationship, it's actually a friendship, and actually something stripped back, that then, of course, you want to work with people that you want to work with, who you're interested in, but also you want to continue a discussion. But I wonder, maybe there are conspicuous examples from your past,
Well, I think that very particular relationship in working on something is I actually do think that is quite similar in intensity with all the artists I worked with.
Right.
But not everyone turns into a friend.
No, right.
That's a different level.
Yeah.
But there's a few people, you all know that, because they come, they
come back.
To talk about things.
Yeah.
And it goes beyond the actual artwork. Well, of course, that's all in there too. But it goes about many things, how to think about things, or how things are being thought about, what one is alert about, or what one gets nervous or not nervous
but also
about.
To make
and that's
possible...
to
make possible the conversation in the first place.
Yeah.
That when we know this as a truth in our lives, it's just that it seldom happens like that, Yeah,
Why would it? It would be very strange for me this not being part of it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But then, and as easy as that is, and again, as obvious as that seems, there are so many apparatuses that are potentially there to kind of poison that possibility. So initially, if the first thing is to clear the deck in some way, even if it's even if it's a red herring, it's just to keep things just outside of this, in order to found this thing that then can survive the inundation of the return of the institution in a way, you know.
But I have to say, I mean, again, when we speak about institutional practice, we're just we had a ECVAN show at the Stedelijk Museum, which is now going to the Martin Gropiusbau, and that's a totally different institutional setup. You know, like the Martin Gropiusbau doesn't have a curatorial team. They basically invite shows. You know? So you have a kind of a distancing already from the production of content. In a way, it's more like a buy-in of content, and that's a totally different thing. And I have to say, I'm really, really amazed. You know, what makes an institution disappear in the end, in the actual process of the installation or production or of a show or of the work with an artist, is really that everyone is excited about that, those details of not inhibiting the experience for the artist and the art and the audience, and that needs a lot of details.
Yeah.
Like to understand. Yes, even if that light is not the right one, then you don't stop. You don't stop until the slipping underwear is gone.
Yeah.
And that is really important to remind yourself in the institutional practice that this is what it has to be. But I perfectly understand. There's so many moments where you said, yeah, but the money, the time, the other measurable reports we should give about things, you know, that all is so is adding up to things that are not necessarily about that experience. And so that is also our job, to remind us ourselves for that.
Yeah.
And I think that is, of course, if you, I think that is a huge part of that relationship of artists towards institution also, because you're not stopping in your work until you think that's your image is there.
Yeah.
So I think art and artists have the right for the institutions which work with them, that this radical moment is also matched.
Yeah. Yes, that's interesting. It's kind of rising to meet the importance of the thing that you're actually doing. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that this
sounds a bit naive. I'm not naive.
No, I'm finding it very hard to not speak both. I mean, I was fascinated by even the title of this thing not being suspended between quotation marks. You know, that there is some weird point here where there's an earnestness that's necessary about, I mean, even a mildly utopian kind of like, well, you know, wanting this to be the case, you know.
But maybe we can also talk about a bit about the two shows.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
So, and because I thought that was very, very interesting, because your production came out of questions we asked one another.
Yeah, totally.
And totally not the curator in there, but to ask questions that relate to themes of, you know, for example, how do you do and the institution is there then, but as a question also, how does the institution have to adopt to it, or what are the possibilities also of the context?
Yeah.
So I remember very clearly that I asked you, so what do we do with sound spilling?
Yeah.
For you know, when you the plan was the plan was to give an overview of what Ed had done and been working on, and possibly have a new work for the exhibition, and in the end both happened, both versions happened. But there was the question in an institution, in the architectural setup also, of Kunsthalle Zurich, for example, sound spilling is like a nightmare. And that's a general question of video or sound-based exhibitions, as we all know.
Well, on a very practical level, obviously what artists can bring to the institution can be can be actually, shit, we don't have the facility to show what's being made, and well, then that's a huge problem,
Yeah.
But I mean, it's interesting that that's that bears comparison to, I don't know, like to much more theoretical things, insofar as there is this immediacy of just coming up against the problem of masses of concrete that are just going to echo everywhere,
Yeah.
But I also think, for the first show, the Kunsthalle in Zurich, this piece, a piece that I made for the show called Ribbons that ended up at the Serpentine and things, but it was very conspicuously born of our conversation, not of your curating, but just of the invitation to do a show, and then over the course of the months leading up to it and the making of the work, a constant dialogue and a constant proximity as well. That there's so much that in my head, in my experience, that's born of our getting to know each other in that thing, which is amazing. That's rather than it even being as simple as a commission, but that it is like everything else.
Half of the time he disappeared.
Yes, half of the time he disappeared. Yeah, but it's like those things are important as well. It's the kind of solidarity, but also a critical imperative. Like I've always felt that what's maybe interesting about your approach is they're not very afraid to call bullshit on things, or just to have an opinion about it. Because I think that a lot of the time finding good critical conversations outside of your immediate little world of friends or whatever is very hard, actually. And necessarily some of these things can be kind of lonely in certain ways. But actually to have an institutional voice who immediately impresses upon you that what they're saying they mean, that it neither is sycophantic nor overtly dismissive nor is actually fully engaged. It means a lot, I think. Insofar as like the institution's allowing for the artist begins way before the building, and then we stroll up to the building together and know how to deal with this thing as a sort of unified front in a way, which I think is, again, I feel that that's, for me, a kind of an ideal situation where, because working in a vacuum is bullshit, so why would that be the case with the institution?
Yeah, but I think one of what you call also bullshit is, I really do think that very particular ways of interpretation also keep away from work, on the experience of work. And I see, I'm really interested in going beyond interpretation, so to get interpretation out of the way too. And therefore I think one has to get much more knowledgeable about to understand what's there without, the approach of interpretation, which interpretation I consider very much being informed by things I already know.
Yeah, right.
And I think that the exciting thing about seeing things we didn't know yet is to also change that.
Yeah. I mean, just to return to the central kind of thing of what is it that artists fundamentally I mean, it seems like, how do you feel, I suppose, how do you feel about the ways in which institutions should be ready and able to change or respond? I mean, obviously there are things like putting up some acoustic paneling, but I mean, like, fundamentally, this is why I feel like so much of this is a kind of issue to do with hospitality to a certain degree, or the figuring of hospitality. Yeah. Like, when you invite someone into your house, how do you make that person aware that they don't have to take their shoes off, or they don't use a coaster, or something? Do you know what I mean? Like the etiquette that is afforded to the stranger coming in. And part of that is the productive confusion, I feel like, between guest and host. Yeah. And so as an artist to go in, to feel supported by the institution is to also feel part of it, I think. And that can only happen by also the institution moving in that direction. Yeah. I don't know, I mean, I'm fascinated by...
But it's both ways.
Yes, of course.
I had a because with the thing in Zurich, but also with other projects I was involved in, often the question is what architecture the artists would want.
Yeah.
You know, and Liam Gillick said, so don't talk down on us. That what we also good at is to react to space. You know, that there is no ideal space, because they space or there is no ideal space. So it's also about that, you know, put in the open what the conditions are. Yeah. And then that is part of the artistic work. I feel very strongly also to integrate that in the whole process.
Yeah, but that's, you know, that feels like the original model of that is a dialogue, you know, but it is a kind of a back and forth. Insofar as, I mean, Liam Gillick's totally right. There is, and I remember being on a thing about, you know, potential new building, and this question that was demanded of the funders and things was like, let's consult artists about what they need. And what they need is support and you know, a shitload of things, but what they don't need is like a bespoke room with loads of good Ethernet connections or something, you know, like this kind of, that's a confusion of what really, it's a way to actually...
And it might change. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, exactly. I mean, you're more likely to go in there and go, well, can we just remove all of that? And, you know, you're more likely probably, or at least I feel like, to sabotage that. To sabotage that kind of fake coherence. Or that.
But I do think that one of the miscommunication or the absence of the artist not necessarily has to do with institutions are not open to work with artists, but it has to do with not laying the conditions of the institutional open.
Right.
So you know, like, let's disguise we don't have that money.
Yeah.
Why? I think it's a crucial element of the dialogue. Of the end, it's like there's limitations. There's where can we push it? I mean, we spoke about, for example, I did 2002. I did a show with Philippe Parino and Pierre Wieck, but for the first time, all the Anli works came together, and they pushed it to they were at that time this whole group, so to say, they were highly interested in collapsing institutional practice in terms of modes of production. You know, like how do you transport production processes from the film world, for example, the movie, like really movie size of productions, into the institutional work, the art institutional work. How do you bring scientific research processes, which like beyond any you know, money acceptability an institution ever could have? How do you include that into the art system? And that was almost unbearable to work with that, you know. But it was highly interesting also. Say, what happens if you allow this test in as part of a development of an exhibition project?
Sure.
When you emotion goes high then.
Yeah, right.
But it was really interesting to see also, what defines that it only can happen that way in the system of art.
But again, this is like your stress testing with Tino or something. It's like a...
this with the other way around, in a way.
Yeah. But I think that thing of, like you said, like if you can't afford something or if there is a problem, I suppose when I think of disappearing the institution, it's not that. I think you're right. I think the openness of a kind of vulnerability as well, and you know, where it's a kind of, you know, being honest with one another. Because the worst thing in the world is headbutting a kind of, is that going off? Yeah. Don't worry about it.
They didn't pay their electric bill.
It wasn't doing much anyway. You know, I suppose if the resistant parts of what we're dealing with, the kind of the walls, the boundaries of certain things, certainly one of them is not sharing information. You know. Yeah.
I really do think that that's a crucial element of it, that you together with the artist or with any given context for a show, that you define how far, and how we can push it together also. I think that it has that's the beginning, that you have to say, let's push it together. Where do, but also be open about.
Yeah.
And it's not possible.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks to the ECVAN for giving us this opportunity to introduce the ateliers to you. We have a little slideshow. I will present the institution first, and then David will join in, and he will speak about the perspective of the artist on an institute like the ateliers. We are an artist-run institute in Amsterdam, and our mission is to give young talent in the visual arts a chance to develop their work. We accommodate 20 artists from all over the world, and they work in a private studio for 2 years, supported by prominent artists who do studio visits weekly. And this is how it started. This is 1963. This is in the city of Haarlem, which is 20 kilometers west of Amsterdam. And there you see some artists squatting a former police barrack to start their own art school, basically. That was the idea. The ateliers was founded by artists because they were discontent with the art school education at that time. You know, in the 60s saw the rise of performance art and body art and conceptual art, minimal art, video art, and all these new and exciting tendencies were not being addressed in the traditional art schools in Holland. So one started to realize, if you want to become an artist, don't go to art school. You better consult an artist. You learn art by doing it. And this is still the core of our program. So it's based on the individual studio practice of artists. And the idea is simple. Beginning artists can learn from experienced artists. This is the building where we're located now. This is in central Amsterdam. It's the oldest art school building in the Netherlands, actually designed in 1875 in a neoclassical style. It's built for the purpose of making art, so it fits us like a glove. We have 23 large studios, 4 workshops and 2 galleries. And the ateliers is run by a very small staff of only 4 employees full-time. I'll take you inside. This is the front door. It's a bit ironic that we're housed in this building, actually, because this is the former State School of Art in the Netherlands. So in the 60s, when the ateliers was founded by these rebelling artists protesting against the establishment, it's a bit ironic that we're now housed in the former stronghold of our opponents. But it's a beautiful building, spacious and light, as you can see, with very large studio spaces. You know, these are the former classrooms of the State School, so they are up 80 to 100 square meter. Every artist has their own private space. They have a key of the studio, the key to the building, so they can work anytime they want. And for many artists, it's a kind of decisive and formative phase in their development. Many make decisions about their work, about how they perceive themselves as artists, that are quite decisive for the rest of their careers. They have a chance to sort of reinvent themselves as artists, reconsidering their ideas and values and opinions in a constant dialogue with other artists. Now, this is a picture of the group of participants from 2 years ago in the garden patio of the ateliers. So we're open to young, talented artists who are open to feedback and to critique and who want to change and improve their work. We focus on artists in their 20s, trying to help them in realizing their ambitions. So every year, 500 to 700 artists apply, and every year we only have 10 studios available. They come from the Netherlands and from Europe, but in this group you can also see artists from Venezuela and from China, all regions of the world actually. We try to create a professional working climate, and actually working in a studio in a building with 20 other artists from all over the world is kind of a stimulating experience for many of them. The participants, as we call them, they're not students, they're participants, they learn as much from each other as they learn from their tutor artists. They're all very motivated and highly ambitious. So how do we select these applications? Well, first of all, we look at the quality of the work. And then to the artistic ambitions of the maker. And we also look at somebody's potential for future development, as we consider if the ateliers is actually the right place to realize these ambitions. You know, sometimes we tell an applicant he might be better off going to a film school or something. And also there are artists who are not really in need of a large studio space. So we rather give the rooms to somebody who actually uses these studio spaces. And also, last but not least, we consider what input an artist may have on the community of artists as a whole. Every week on Tuesday, artists and guests of the ateliers do studio visits individually. Here you see British artist Angela Bullock visiting the studio of Tao Cheng. These tutor artists are very committed. They select the participants and they also feel responsible towards them. They act as a kind of mentor. All tutoring artists meet with all participating artists, regardless of their discipline or medium. We consider the visual arts as one undivided field, and we believe that you can learn from any artist. So we ask the participants to be present every Tuesday to meet with our tutors. And the rest of the week, the building is for them to do whatever they feel like doing them. So on a Tuesday, you might have 2 or 3 or 4 visits. This is a studio of a Dutch photographer, Simon van Til. And on the left, you see Lara Almachigui. She is a Spanish artist visiting his studio. And on the right-hand side is David Zinki, an artist from Berlin. You know, and these participants during a day like that get all these conflicting opinions and views and outspoken ideas about art, which they have to deal with in a way. And that's basically the goal, that they benefit from all this feedback and that they make up their own mind about what kind of art they want to do. This is a slightly older picture of Marlene Dumas with Lucy Stein. Actually, the studio conversation is for us quite central. Steve McQueen was also for a couple of years a tutor at the ateliers, and he mentioned that he actually never felt so lonely when he was at the opening of the Venice Biennale, because there were hundreds of artists and nobody spoke about art. And the thing is, if you go to a place like this, then actually you can sit down in the studio and actually talk art all day long. So it's a kind of rare space nowadays where artists can talk amongst each other about the art they want to do. There you see Dutch artist Erik van Lieshout. He's participating in the show you just have seen. His pieces are outside in this container. Erik came to the ateliers when he was 24. Just graduated. He met with Jan Dibbets, who is an influential artist from the generation that came to prominence in the 60s and 70s. And actually it was Jan Dibbets who really pushed Erik to go beyond his limits and to reach further. And you know, he was surrounded by other artists who were also 24, 25 years old, one of them being Urs Fischer. You know, and this situation where you can actually concentrate on your work without being hassled by a lot of other things is really, really stimulating. So, the workshops are quite simple. As you can see, we just offer the basic equipment needed to produce your work. You know, if you need more high-tech facilities, you have to look for solutions outdoors. But this is common in every artist's practice today. We save the money for the content. That's the most important thing for us. So we try to stimulate this dialogue amongst artists. We invite people to visit the studios, and then by the end of the day to talk about their own practice. These are high-profile artists like architect Rem Koolhaas, which you can see there in the corner. But also young and emerging artists, like on the top you see Pettit Halilai from Kosovo. You know, and it's kind of interesting. Ed Atkins was one of our guests not so long time ago. It's actually interesting if these guests visit the studios, reflect on what they see there, and then talk about their own practice by the end of the day, and at the same time then reflecting on what they've been seeing in the studios going on, what these young people are making. So we try to create a setting where you can actually exchange ideas about art. I show you a few images of exhibitions that we have organized in the building. Every year we have the Amsterdam Art Weekend, so we participate in that, just like the Stedelijk and many other institutions in the city. The first time we asked the participants themselves to make a show, and they decided to give a sort of survey, a quick scan of all the video that was being made. The last edition, we invited a former participant of Ateliers, Paloma Polo. She's a Spanish artist. She worked in the Philippines over the past 2 years. And she was involved in a kind of social struggle which is going on there against the governmental economic program in the rural areas of the Philippines. So the show was accompanied by this debate where we invited artists. You can see Paloma Polo and Lara Machigui there, but also some political refugees from the Philippines based in the Netherlands to discuss these ideas about the social role art can play. Now, we don't run a theory program. The theory comes in through the practice. So it's really based on the individual studio practice, but we invite critics and theorists to visit the studios to meet with the artist. And also quite a few English critics do visit us regularly. Martin Herbert, Tom Morton, and Jennifer Allen are amongst them. We also join into the Performance Festival, which is organized in the spring with a group of local art galleries. Lucy Stein performing here with Death Chanties from Glasgow. Here's Raad Yassin. He's an artist who was at the Ateliers some 6-7 years ago doing a performance on a double bass. Here's some images of the annual show we organize. When the artists leave the program after 2 years, we clear out the ground floor and present the works to the public, because usually the building is sort of closed for the public. But not during these artist talks and not during the exhibitions. I give you an impression of some Dutch and English artists who have been working with us. Fiona McKay, Leonard Lahuis. Actually, quite a lot of people attend this exhibition. It's kind of regarded as a sort of talent pool. So many people join the opening. Gallerists, curators, collectors. So the so-called offspring shows are kind of an important platform for our participants. They organize, the artists organize themselves also readings and screenings and meetings. Some works of Ateliers artists outside the Ateliers. I mean, this is the Venice Biennale of 2013. And we had, five artists were former participants of the Ateliers. On the top right is Melvin Moti, a filmmaker from Rotterdam. Lara Machigui was representing Spain in the Spanish pavilion. In the center, Paloma Polo. On the top there is an installation by Eric van Lieshout, once again, and Matthew Monahan from Los Angeles. So, I mean, for us, it's just really, it makes us really proud to see that such a small place like the Ateliers with only 10 artists per year has such a good representation on an international platform. Even in the galleries, of course, it's not our aim to cater the galleries, but it's a good thing that the stuff that we are supporting is supported later on also by others. Urs Fischer at Gagosian, Tom Houseago at Hauserentwicht, Marlene Dumas, David Swinner. But especially, we support artists. At a very early, you have to remember all these artists were 24 years old, totally unknown, just beginning and unexperienced. So, this is Rory Pilgrim. I just wanted to show you some of his work because, he's kind of an artist doing stuff that is impossible to sell, almost. He's now repeating with school children in the patio of the Ateliers. So at the Ateliers, Rory sort of laid a foundation for his peculiar way of working. Working with other people, without materials in the concrete sense of the word. This is his end show at Ateliers, and it's called Can We Leave Things As They Are? And it's kind of an interesting project, and if you forgive me, I'll quote the artist himself describing this project. So I quote Rory. At 4:50 a.m. on the 19th of May, 1989, Zhao Qiang went to Tiananmen Square and personally made a speech urging the students to end their hunger strike. He called out to them, "We are already old. It doesn't matter to us anymore." This was his last public appearance. Inspired by this historic speech, a special meeting room was established for a 2-week exhibition in Amsterdam. Located in an institution long associated with young people, the meeting room contained a circle of chairs set around a bonsai tree. In a corner hung a simple notice board containing a music score written for Carillon, headed with the question, "Can we leave things as they are?" It also contained an invitation for seniors from the city to come together on the last day of the exhibition to explore and answer the same question, "Can we leave things as they are?" Over the 2 weeks, a recording of the music, played on Carillon bells, sounded every half an hour throughout the building. The music's final phrase had 3 possibilities. Its ultimate resolution would be dependent on the answer provided by the seniors. After the final meeting, the seniors were taken to the historic Freedom Carillon bells situated on a square in Amsterdam called Plein 4045, where the composition, including the appropriate final phrase, was performed in full and rung out across the city. Composed in a tradition of public announcements through bells, the decision of the group was broadcast to the city and included one of the 3 possible outcomes. We can leave things as they are, we can not leave things as they are, or we cannot decide. So the question that Rory Pilgrim has raised, can we leave things as they are, is to me an appropriate metaphor for the questions and considerations of young artists working at the ateliers. In fact, the spirit of the 60s to experiment with new ideas about art is still very much alive. David is here. Maybe we have a few minutes to lay more emphasis on the artist perspective of the ateliers.
So thank you for having me in here today. I think Rory is even a good bridge on how we could talk openly about the ateliers. We remembered in the airplane this morning, like how we met Rory for the first time. He was actually sitting in a studio, a big harp, furthermore like an empty studio. And actually, sometimes I heard he was sleeping underneath his table. And there were these weird stories about somebody that was totally, let's say, not able to come up with something that happened later in the process when he was actually at the ateliers. So that meant we had a very young artist among us, let's say, and also now we have, let's say, kids from 22 up to 32. That's a little bit the profile of age. Yes, I'm here today because I was joining the program myself from 2007 to 2009. I was having a large studio making mainly sculptures and starting with video when I was there. Now I'm a tutor since 2 years actually, and also in the artistic advisory board. So it's actually a kind of, let's say, a functional board, let's say, that keeps up the dialogue between the director, between the students, but also coming up with ideas who to invite for lectures or come up with ideas who to invite for talk, for studio visits. And actually during the talk also before, I was thinking, I came up with some notes I made on Beatrix and Ed Atkins' lecture also about institutional everyday critique. I want to sum it up actually. I think that's also happening at the ateliers. I think we constantly have to like kind of negotiate like what is actually the let's say the fundament of the place, as it is an artistic or artist-run space, but also we are also in we are also in the situation to come up with the money questions and all those things. So I think it's an everyday repeating thing we're actually going through to think about what the institution is, as it is still run by the artist together with the director and a financial director. Warsteiner, which was actually shown in the lecture before, I think that was like, it's like I asked also Dominic, maybe we should also have Warsteiner with our next opening, is actually like how the things could go if they, if you don't take care, or let's say, if you don't have a vision, let's say, what the institute should be. And I think what we always make clear in conversations also towards the government is also that we are an artistic driven institution done by artists, and that is always let's say the crucial also one of the crucial parts why sponsors are, for example, sponsoring the ateliers. And I think we as artists, or let's say for example, me, when I started, because it's a small institution and everybody is very visible, you also feel immediately like you are representing the institution from the first day, actually. So wherever you go, you're part of the club somehow. Yes, so maybe we could chat about this more and how your experience is, because Dominic, you're here in the institution since 20 years?
Yeah, actually it's still run as it was more than 50 years ago. It's still artists who are running the school. It's not really a school, but it's also not really running. I mean, it's just a building with 23 studios and a lot of highly motivated artists who want to make the best out of that. So we always had to sort of fight for our raison d'être, because not being a school, not being a gallery, not being any of that is kind of tricky or difficult to handle sometimes for other people. But over the years, it always showed its own legitimacy in a way. And the original organizational structure is actually still intact. So I am the director, but I have hardly anything to say there, because it's the team of artists who is represented in the so-called advisory board who actually have a final say in the policies of the institution. Of course, there's the board who is safeguarding that everything goes right and that we don't make too many big mistakes, but it's still the artists who are running the school, and that sets it also apart from other or similar institutions. And for us, it's exciting to stimulate this debate about what can art be today. You know, being there for such a long time doesn't hinder me at all, because every year we have new, young, ambitious people working in the studios. So that makes it really, as Beatrix addressed earlier, an institute which is constantly re-evaluating itself. Because every discussion taking place in the studios, you have to sort of start from scratch again. I mean, all the opinions and the views and the visions that young artists bring to the ateliers, you know, which they were learned at art school, has to do with their cultural background. You suddenly have to sort of re-evaluate them when you are in such a situation, where maybe the ideas that you always thought were the right thing might actually be only have a limited validity. So in that sense, it's the permanence of institutional critique embodied within the institute, and I think that's the same goes for the museums and for a lot of other art institutions, and especially for a place that is totally centered around the individual artist studio practice. So please understand that we're not really a school, although I use the word, but we don't have exams, we don't give degrees, you don't have to write a paper or anything when you work there. It's really something between studying art and being an artist. So.
Yes, I think that's exactly something that, what you mentioned also this morning, actually, that when coming up with PhDs in the arts and where you have to legitimize what you're actually doing, or coming up with the funding for your thoughts, I think the basic principle and everyday experiment is actually that you really start with being in the studio and start working whatever is on. I think this morning you also said, Mary, one of our participants, she came as a painter, and now she's actually on her computer making animations, where you were already doubting, oh no, the last painter is also lost. But I think that is exactly what the atelier is for. And I said, no, relax. I think she will come back to painting later on. But what you said already, I think it's the same to other institutions in the city. What Beatrix Ruf also mentions, actually, for example, when you come up with applications, like it's not all about visitor numbers. It's not all to make everybody happy with each student that comes out, let's say. I think it's much more interesting to have those places and to have them free to experiment. That's what is the most important thing, and that is something that has to be communicated mainly actually to the outside world, let's say, to politics actually, that there shouldn't be like an immediately outcome that is actually capitalized, but it's actually like the common thoughts, let's say, and artistic history and heritage that is actually important for the Dutch, but also important for Amsterdam, for example, and for the art climate in general. Yeah.
Maybe we leave it there and take some questions later. Yeah. Okay, thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much for everybody's help and conversations today. The breakout sessions went on for a while, which was great. It just means that some of you might have parked in the college car park where you have to move your car by 6 or it closes. So anyone who's done that, Joe or someone who lives here might be able to give better details on which car park that is. You might want to go move it now. The outpost screening is 22 minutes, so we will just about hit 6 o'clock. Does anybody know if they're in that parking lot? Okay, the other housekeeping thing then is that somebody left their phone upstairs in the artist in residence thing plugged in. Okay, so don't forget that. And we just really wanted time for some people to kind of feedback on what was discussed and any sort of key points that came out. But for the purposes of time, I think what we'd like to do is really go straight on to the Outpost screening. I know a lot of you are waiting for the fantastic film screening the Outpost have put together for us. But thank you to the speakers, everybody who's made the journey out here, for sharing all your stories. I could hear in the sessions that you guys were really feeding into a lot of the discussion, so it's fantastic for us to hear what you've been through and your experiences and the case studies, and to share it with everyone. We will be compiling some of the information. Linda's got a nice big piece of paper for me that everyone's written on throughout these sessions. I'll be doing my best to read the handwriting and also talking to some of my colleagues that were in these sessions to feed back into a paper where we've kind of captured what we discussed, any concerns and any of the issues that have come out of it. And we'll be hosting a summary on cvan.org.uk/east, which is the East CVAN webpage. And also, This Is Tomorrow has been filming for us all day, so we will be hosting that. They'll be hosting that, as will Wysing, on our web pages for the archive of the film of the day. Did you want to say anything, Tom? No? Yeah, thanks again. Also for the facilitators, for moderating all the breakout sessions. I know it's not easy with 30 to 40 people. And also, the evaluation forms, thank you, Dominic. We've put some evaluation forms out for everybody. It'd be really useful for us just going forward to figure out what kinds of things did work for you, what kinds of things didn't work for you. There's lots of pens at the back. Just put your hand up if you need a pen, and I'll bring it to you as well. And I think, thank you to Focal Point for hosting today. It's been really, really lovely, and I hope everyone's really enjoyed it. Thank you.